New intern accidentally emailed her diary to the richest millionaire of the city, and what he did next shocked everyone. Before we begin this story, tell us in the comments, what is the most embarrassing mistake you've ever made at a new job? And at the end of the story, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Enjoy! The whoosh sound of the email leaving her outbox was the most final, most terrifying sound Kimberly Gonzalez had ever heard. It wasn't the sound of a task completed, it was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. She stared at the screen, her heart instantly migrating from her chest to somewhere in her shoes. Her monitor displayed the sent confirmation. To Vincent.Chandler@chandlercorp.com. Subject, Weekly Intern Report, K. Gonzalez. Attachments 1. One attachment. That was the problem. She had meant to attach the polished, professional, and mind-numbingly boring report she had spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting. Instead, in her coffee-fueled haze, she had attached a scanned page from her personal, private, and brutally honest diary. "Oh no," she whispered, the words barely a breath. "Oh no, 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 no." Her mind frantically replayed the contents of that single catastrophic page. It wasn't just a diary entry. It was a manifesto of her chaotic, broke, and desperately hopeful life. It started with a frantic budget calculation that looked something like: rent, $1,200, student loans, $400, ramen noodles, $50, grand total of misery, $650, current bank balance, $18.37. Then came the part about her dreams, the raw, unfiltered ambition of a girl who wanted to be a writer more than anything else in the world. "One day, I'll write a novel so good, people will forget they have to go to work. They'll just sit and read and feel something real for a change." And then came the final, career-ending, social suicide-inducing paragraph. The paragraph about her new boss, Vincent Chandler, the richest and most intimidating man in the city. First day as an intern at Chandler Corp. The building is so tall I think it has its own weather system. And the man himself, Vincent Chandler. Wow. He walked past my cubicle today and the temperature dropped by 20 degrees. He's handsome, I guess, in that I own a small country and find your existence mildly inconvenient sort of way. He has the emotional range of a very stylish, very expensive brick. Does he ever smile? Or would that crack his face? I bet he doesn't even sweat. He probably just emits a cool, cucumber-scented mist of pure condescension. Kimberly dropped her head onto her desk, the cheap laminate cool against her burning forehead. She had just sent an email to a billionaire calling him a stylish brick who probably emitted cucumber-scented mist. This wasn't just a mistake, but it was a formal declaration of career-ending insanity. She had to do something. Recall the email? It was too late. The read receipt had already pinged back. Hack into the company server? Her technical skills topped out at turning her laptop off and on again. Run. Running seemed like a very, very good option. She could just stand up, walk out of the building, and never come back. Move to a remote island and live off coconuts and shame. 47 floors above, in an office so large it could host a small wedding, Vincent Chandler was bored. He stared out at the panoramic view of the city, not seeing the iconic skyline, but the endless stream of numbers and projections in his head. A $10 billion merger was on the line, but it felt as interesting as watching paint dry. "Mr. Chandler?" his assistant, a perpetually nervous man named Arthur, said through the intercom. "You have a new email from one of the interns." "Flagged as unusual, how?" Vincent replied, his voice a low, monotonous baritone. "The subject is Weekly Intern Report, sir, but the contents are not a report." Vincent sighed, the sound of a man who had seen every possible variation of corporate nonsense. "Put it on the screen, Arthur." The email appeared on the massive monitor on his wall. He saw the subject line, the sender's name, Kimberly Gonzalez, a name he didn't recognize, and the single, innocently named attachment. He opened it. For a full minute, there was absolute silence in the office. Vincent leaned forward, his famously unreadable expression slowly changing. His eyebrows, which usually sat in a straight, severe line, lifted slightly. He read the frantic budget calculations. He read the part about writing a novel that would make people forget to go to work. And then he read the paragraph about himself, the emotional range of a very stylish, very expensive brick. Arthur, watching his boss's reaction on a small monitor in his anteroom, held his breath, fully expecting an explosion. He had his hand over the button to call security, but Vincent Chandler didn't explode. He didn't even frown. A strange, unfamiliar expression crossed his face. He read the line again, amidst a cool, cucumber-scented mist of pure condescension. And then it happened, a sound so rare in that office that Arthur almost didn't recognize it. A low chuckle. It started deep in his chest and escaped as a short, sharp burst of genuine amusement. He stood up and walked to the monitor, reading the words on the screen as if they were a fascinating artifact from another civilization. No one had spoken to him or about him with such unfiltered, sarcastic honesty in years. Everyone in his life was a sycophant, an employee, or a rival. They were all afraid of him, or they wanted something from him. This Kimberly Gonzalez, she wasn't afraid. At least, not on paper. She was just a broke, ramen-eating intern with a dream of being a writer and a brutally sharp sense of humor. For the first time in what felt like a decade, Vincent felt a flicker of genuine curiosity. He was a stylish brick. He emitted cucumber-scented mist. It was the most ridiculous, most insulting, and most interesting thing he had read all year. He walked back to his desk and pressed the intercom button. "Arthur," he said, his voice back to its usual calm, but with a new, almost imperceptible undercurrent of amusement. "Yes, Mr. Chandler?" Arthur replied, his voice trembling slightly. "Find out where the intern, Kimberly Gonzalez, is sitting." "Right away, sir." And then, Vincent paused, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "Tell her I want to see her. Now." Down on the 20th floor, Kimberly was in the middle of a full-blown panic attack, trying to draft a follow-up email that could somehow fix the unfixable. "Dear Mr. Chandler, please disregard my previous email. I have been possessed by a sarcastic ghost. It's a medical condition. Sincerely, the intern who will now be fired." It was at that moment that a prim, severe-looking woman from the executive floor appeared at her cubicle. She looked down her nose at Kimberly as if she were a particularly resilient piece of lint. "Kimberly Gonzalez?" "Yes," Kimberly squeaked, her voice an octave higher than usual. The woman didn't smile. "Mr. Chandler will see you now." The words hit Kimberly like a physical blow. The entire office, a sea of identical cubicles, seemed to fall silent. Every head slowly rose, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. It was happening. The long, lonely walk to the executioner's office. Kimberly stood up on legs that felt like they were made of cooked spaghetti. She grabbed her notepad, though she had no idea why. To take notes on her own firing? "Now," the woman repeated, turning on her heel and leading the way to the executive elevators. As Kimberly followed, a single thought echoed in her mind. A thought that was equal parts terrifying and strangely hilarious. "Well, at least I'll get to see if he really does smell like cucumbers." The walk to the executive elevator was the longest journey of Kimberly's life. Every step echoed on the polished marble floors, a drum beat counting down her final seconds as an employed person. The elevator ascended with a silent, terrifying efficiency, each floor a new level of a corporate Dante's Inferno, with the 87th floor, Vincent Chandler's office, being the final fiery circle. She rehearsed her apology in her head. "Mr. Chandler, I am a menace to society and office etiquette. I understand if you need to have me escorted from the premises by a SWAT team. I will go quietly." It didn't seem quite sufficient. The elevator doors opened onto a space so quiet and luxurious it felt like a different universe. The air was cool and smelled faintly of something clean and expensive, like money itself had a fragrance. Arthur, the nervous assistant, was waiting. He didn't meet her eyes, instead gesturing towards a pair of massive oak doors with a solemnity usually reserved for announcing the death of a king. "He's waiting," Arthur whispered, as if speaking too loudly might cause the stock market to crash. Kimberly pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. Her first thought was that the office wasn't an office, it was a territory. It was vast, with an entire wall made of glass offering a godlike view of the city. A sleek, minimalist desk sat in the center, looking less like a piece of furniture and more like an altar to capitalism. And there he was, Vincent Chandler. He wasn't sitting behind his desk, he was standing by the window, his back to her, a tall, imposing silhouette against the city's turnaround. "Mr. Chandler," Kimberly's voice was a pathetic squeak. You wanted to see me." He remained silent for a long, torturous moment, just looking out at his kingdom. Then, slowly he turned. His face was exactly as she remembered from the hallway. Sharp, impossibly handsome, and utterly devoid of emotion. He held a single sheet of paper in his hand, her diary page. "Kimberly Gonzalez," he said, his voice a low, calm baritone that sent a shiver of pure terror down her spine. "Please have a seat." She practically fell into one of the leather chairs in front of his desk. It was so soft she was afraid she might be absorbed by it. "I received your report," he said, walking slowly towards the desk. He placed the paper down and looked at her, his blue eyes as cool and unreadable as a frozen lake. "Mr. Chandler, I am so sorry," she blurted out, the words tumbling over each other in a frantic rush. "It was an accident. A horrible, catastrophic, fireable offense-level accident. I attached the wrong file. I was tired, I hadn't had enough coffee, and my laptop hates me. It was a perfect storm of incompetence. I understand if you need to fire me. In fact, you probably should. It would be a public service." He didn't respond. He just continued to look at her, his expression unchanging. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Kimberly was sure she was about to have a heart attack. Finally, he spoke. "So," he began, his voice dangerously quiet. "A stylish, expensive brick." Kimberly froze. Her blood turned to ice. He was quoting it. He was quoting her diary. He leaned against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms. "And I admit, what was it? A cool, cucumber-scented mist of pure condescension." This was it. This was a new form of torture he had invented. Humiliation by direct quote. She closed her eyes, bracing for the final blow. "I have to admit," he continued, his voice still unnervingly calm, "I was unaware of my atmospheric emissions. I'll have to speak to my R&D department about that." Kimberly's eyes snapped open. Was that humor? Was this stylish brick capable of sarcasm? He picked up the diary page, his gaze scanning it again. "You also seem to be in a precarious financial situation. $18.37 in your bank account. That is precise." "It's a very sad and very real number, sir," she mumbled, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her whole. "And you want to write a novel," he went on, his eyes finding hers. "One that will make people forget they have to go to work." She just nodded, unable to speak. He set the paper down and walked around the desk, finally sitting in his throne-like chair. He steepled his fingers and looked at her, his expression shifting from detached amusement to something more serious, more focused. "Miss Gonzalez," he said, and the shift to her formal surname made her flinch. "I have a proposition for you." A proposition? Was he going to offer her a severance package of a single ramen noodle packet? "As you have so astutely observed," he began, "my public and private persona could be described as emotionally economical. My emails are transactional, my speeches are efficient, they lack a certain human element." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Your writing, on the other hand, even in a moment of financial panic and personal frustration, has a voice. It's sarcastic, it's honest, and it's interesting. You called me a brick who smells like cucumbers. That's the most creative feedback I've received in a decade." Kimberly just stared, her mind unable to compute the direction this was going. "I am officially offering you a new position," he said, the words dropping into the silent room like stones. "You will no longer be an intern in the marketing department. Here it comes," she thought. "Fired. Instead," he continued, "you will work directly for me, as my personal ghostwriter." Kimberly's brain officially short-circuited. You're what?" "My ghostwriter. My director of authentic voice, if you prefer a corporate title. You will be responsible for drafting my emails, my speeches, my public statements. Your job will be to take my efficient communication and inject it with the kind of honesty you so effortlessly put on that page." He gestured to the diary entry. "Your job, Miss Gonzalez, is to make me sound less like a stylish brick." She stared at him, speechless. This had to be a joke. A very cruel, very elaborate joke. "You're kidding," she finally managed to say. "I never kid about business," he replied. "And this is a business proposition. You solve a problem for me. I solve one for you." He leaned back in his chair. "I had my finance department run a projection based on your budget." He glanced at the diary page. "To cover your rent, your student loans, your ramen noodle expenses, and to allow you to live comfortably in this city while pursuing your novel, A yearly salary of $250,000 should be sufficient. Kimberly felt the air leave her lungs. $250,000. That wasn't a salary. That was a lottery win. It was a number so large it felt fictional. And just so we're clear, he added, that's your starting salary. She just sat there, her mouth slightly open, a goldfish in a leather chair. Is this a prank? She whispered. Are you secretly filming this for some billionaire reality show called Humiliate the Intern? For the first time, a genuine, undeniable smile touched the corners of his mouth. No, Miss Gonzalez, this is very real. Kimberly's mind was a battlefield. One side was screaming, say yes, you idiot, it's $250,000. The other, more suspicious side was whispering, why? Why would he do this? What's the catch? Why? She asked, her voice stronger now, her natural skepticism finally overriding her shock. Why me? Why not hire a professional writer, someone with experience? Because professional writers give me what I ask for, he said, his smile fading back into his usual serious expression. They give me polished, corporate-approved nonsense. I've had a dozen of them. They're all boring. He leaned forward again. You, Miss Gonzalez, are not boring. You're brutally honest. I don't want someone who will write what I tell them to write. I want someone who will write what's true. Someone who isn't afraid to call a brick a brick. Her agency, the part of her that had survived on ramen and defiance, took over. So you want me to be your professional sarcasmometer? Precisely, he said without missing a beat. And what if I think an email you want to send makes you sound like an arrogant jerk? Then you will write that. In a professional way, of course. And what if I think your speech for the annual shareholders meeting is a cure for insomnia? Then you will make it interesting, he said, a challenge in his eyes. She stood up, her legs still a little shaky, but her mind clear. She was a broke intern who had just been offered a lifeline made of gold. But she was also Kimberly Gonzalez, and she wasn't anyone's puppet. I'll do it, she said, her voice firm, on one condition. His eyebrows lifted again. He was not a man who was given conditions. And that is? I won't lie for you, she said, looking him straight in the eye. If you do something that's genuinely wrong, I won't spin it to make you look good. I'll write honestly, or I won't write at all. My voice is my own, Mr. Chandler. It's not for sale. He stared at her for a long, silent moment. She had just negotiated her integrity with a billionaire who could buy and sell her 1,000 times over. He had expected her to be grateful, maybe even a little tearful. He had not expected her to set boundaries. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. That, Miss Gonzalez, he said, standing up and extending a hand across the desk, is precisely why you're hired. Kimberly shook his hand, the contact firm and electric. When do I start? Tomorrow, he said. My office, 8 a.m. sharp. We have a very condescending email to send to our board of directors, and I believe it requires a certain cucumber-scented mist. She pulled her hand back, a small smile playing on her own lips. I'll see what I can do. As she walked out of his office, past the terrified-looking Arthur, and back into the elevator, Kimberly felt like she had just stepped out of a bizarre dream. She looked at her reflection in the mirrored walls. She was still the same broke intern in a slightly rumpled blazer, but everything, absolutely everything, had just changed. She had sent an email that should have gotten her fired. Instead, it had landed her the most insane, terrifying, and brilliant job in the world. And she was going to be working, side by side, with the stylish, expensive Brick himself. Kimberly spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, convinced she was the main character in the world's most absurd fever dream. She had gone from being $18.37 rich to having a $250,000 salary offer in the span of a single terrifying meeting. She fully expected to wake up in her tiny apartment with the sound of her cat demanding breakfast, only to find the whole thing was a hallucination brought on by cheap instant coffee. But when her alarm blared at 6 a.m., the memory was still there, vivid and terrifying. She got ready for work in a daze, putting on her best and only blazer, a piece of clothing that suddenly felt woefully inadequate for a director of authentic voice. Walking back into the Chandler Corp building felt different. The day before, she was an invisible intern. Today, she felt like she had a giant flashing neon sign above her head that read, "Fraud, does not belong here, still thinks Synergy is a brand of yogurt." When she got to the 87th floor, Arthur, the nervous assistant, was waiting. This time, however, he looked at her with a new expression, pure, unadulterated awe, as if she were a unicorn who had just learned to code. "Ms. Gonzalez," he whispered, his voice trembling. "This way, please." He led her not to a cubicle, but to an office. An actual office with a door, a window, and a desk that didn't have coffee stains from the previous 3 occupants. It was right next to Vincent's own office, separated by a wall of frosted glass. Forced proximity, of course. "Mr. Chandler said you might need supplies," Arthur said, pointing to a brand-new top-of-the-line laptop on the desk still in its box. Next to it was a stack of elegant notebooks and a pen that looked more expensive than her entire wardrobe. "Thank you, Arthur," she said, trying to sound like she belonged there. "If you need anything," Arthur added, backing away slowly, "anything at all, just let me know. We've never had a director of authentic voice," she supplied, trying not to smile. "Exactly," he said, and practically fled the room. Kimberly sat down in her new chair, which was so ergonomic it felt like being hugged by a friendly robot. She stared at the closed door to Vincent's office. This was it, her first day in the most ridiculous job on the planet. An hour later, the intercom on her desk buzzed, the sound so sharp and unexpected she nearly jumped out of her skin. "Miss Gonzalez, my office, now." She took a deep breath, grabbed a notebook and the expensive pen, and walked in, her heart doing a frantic tap dance against her ribs. Vincent was sitting behind his massive desk, looking every bit the stylish brick she had described. He didn't gesture for her to sit, he just looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Our first task," he said, his voice a low baritone. "I need to send an email to the board of directors regarding the quarterly earnings report. It needs to be firm." "Firm," she repeated, pen poised over her notebook. "Got it." He began to dictate, and it was a masterpiece of corporate nonsense. "Per my previous directive and in light of the Q3 fiscal projections, it is imperative that we leverage our synergistic assets to maximize shareholder value. All department heads are to submit their revised strategic outlines by close of business on Friday. Non-compliance will result in immediate reassessment of departmental budget allocations." He stopped and looked at her. "Got that?" Kimberly looked down at her notebook where she had written, "Blah blah money stuff, do your work, or you're in trouble." "Got it," she said, trying to keep a straight face. "And you want me to translate this?" "Make it sound less like it was written by a robot with a thesaurus," he said, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. She went back to her office and stared at the blank screen of her new laptop. For 10 minutes she typed and deleted, trying to find a balance between her voice and his world. Finally, she had something. She walked back into his office and placed the printed draft on his desk. He picked it up and read it aloud. "Team, a quick update on the Q3 numbers. They look promising, but we can do better. To that end, I need your revised strategic plans on my desk by Friday. Let's not make this complicated. Hit your targets, and we all win. Miss them, and we'll have a much less pleasant conversation about your budget. Let's get it done, Vincent." He finished reading and the room fell silent. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "A much less pleasant conversation?" "It's a firm but fair warning," she defended. "It's what you meant, isn't it? Do this or I'll take your money away. But said in a way that doesn't make you sound like a movie villain." He read it again. "Let's not make this complicated." He looked up at her. "I am often told I make things complicated." "That's because you use words like synergistic assets," she said, unable to stop herself. "No one knows what that means. It sounds like a part from a broken spaceship." He stared at her for a long, intense moment. She was sure this was it, the moment he realized this was a terrible idea and fired her for real. Then he did it again, that small, almost imperceptible chuckle. "Send it," he said, handing the paper back to her. "Send the spaceship email." She took the paper, a wave of relief washing over her. "Yes, sir?" "And Miss Gonzalez?" he said as she was about to leave. "Yes? Your assessment of me being a stylish brick was not entirely inaccurate." She smiled, a real, genuine smile. "I'll try to work on that, sir." "Please don't," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "It's the most honest feedback I've had in years." They worked through the morning like that, a bizarre but surprisingly effective team. He would give her a cold, jargon-filled directive, and she would translate it into clear, concise, and often witty prose. He was the machine. She was the ghost in it. Around 1 p.m., Kimberly's stomach let out a growl so loud it sounded like a small, angry bear had been awakened in her office. She ignored it. Her bank account still had the same sad $18.37 in it, and her first paycheck was weeks away. She had a squashed granola bar in her bag that would have to do. She was in the middle of rewriting a press release about a new tech acquisition when Vincent's voice came over the intercom. "Miss Gonzalez, we'll be working through lunch. I've had something sent up." "Oh, you don't have to do that for me. I'm fine," she said quickly. "It wasn't a question," he replied, and the line went dead. 5 minutes later, Arthur appeared with 2 large, steaming bags from a restaurant she had only ever dreamed of looking at the menu for. It wasn't a stuffy, 5-star French place. It was a famous, rustic Italian restaurant, known for having the best pasta in the city. Arthur placed a container on her desk. "Mr. Chandler thought you might like the cacio e pepe," he said, then quickly left, as if he were afraid of being caught in an act of unauthorized kindness. Kimberly stared at the container. Cacio e pepe. Her favorite. She had mentioned it once, in passing, in a different diary entry she was thankful he hadn't seen, one where she'd written about how she'd celebrate if she ever sold her first novel. He hadn't just ordered her food, he had ordered her favorite food. She looked through the glass wall into his office. He was sitting at his desk, eating from an identical container, not looking at her, completely focused on his work. It was a small, big gesture. A gesture that wasn't about money, but about attention. He had read her file, her diary, and he had remembered. He hadn't offered her money for lunch, which she would have refused out of pride. He had framed it as a work requirement, a command, preserving her dignity while quietly taking care of her. A strange, warm feeling spread through her chest. The stylish brick, it turned out, had a surprisingly thoughtful side. She ate the pasta, and it was the best thing she had ever tasted. Not just because of the flavor, but because of what it represented. It tasted like being seen. Later that afternoon, they were in his office, going over the final draft of a speech for an upcoming tech conference. The mood was lighter, more collaborative. "No," she said, pointing to a line on the screen. "You can't say we will actionize our forward-thinking paradigms. You sound like a villain from a bad sci-fi movie. And what would you suggest, Miss Gonzalez?" he asked, a hint of a smile on his face. "How about, we have a plan, and it's a good one." He chuckled. "You have a remarkable talent for cutting through the nonsense." "It's my only marketable skill," she said with a shrug. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Chandler," Arthur's voice said, laced with its usual anxiety. "Your father is on line 1. The change was instantaneous and chilling. The small smile on Vincent's face vanished. His posture, which had been relaxed, became rigid. The warmth in his eyes was replaced by a familiar, cold shield. It was like watching a drawbridge being pulled up on a fortress. "Put him through," he said, his voice clipped and formal. He swiveled his chair away from her, facing the window. Kimberly sat in silence, suddenly feeling like an intruder. "Yes, father," Vincent said into the phone. His voice was different, deferential but strained. "I am aware of the timeline. No, the Henderson deal is being handled. Yes, I understand your concerns." There was a long pause. Kimberly could hear the faint, angry buzzing of a voice on the other end of the line. "It will be done," Vincent said finally, his voice flat, as always. He hung up without saying goodbye. For a full minute, he just sat there, staring out at the city, his back to her. When he finally turned around, the man who had been joking with her about sci-fi villains was gone. The stylish, expensive brick was back, colder and more impenetrable than ever. "That will be all for today, Miss Gonzalez," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You can go home." She stood up, gathering her things. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice hesitant. He didn't look at her. "I have work to do." It was a clear dismissal. Kimberly walked out of his office, her mind reeling. She had just witnessed the first real crack in Vincent Chandler's perfect, emotionless facade. And whatever he was hiding, it had something to do with the man he called father. The mystery of the richest man in the city had just gotten a whole lot deeper. The chill from Vincent's phone call with his father lingered in the office for the rest of the day. He retreated behind the fortress of his CEO persona, his responses becoming clipped, his eyes losing the spark of amusement Kimberly had started to recognize. She kept her distance, sensing that the stylish brick was back in place, thicker and colder than ever. For the next week, their dynamic shifted into a strange, formal rhythm. He was polite, professional, but the easy banter was gone. He still gave her work, she still translated his corporate jargon into human language, but the collaborative spark had been extinguished. Kimberly found herself missing the man who chuckled at her insults. This version of Vincent Chandler was exactly who she described in her diary, a remote, intimidating figure who made the air colder just by existing. She was just starting to think the weird, wonderful dream was over when his voice crackled over the intercom, sharp and commanding as ever. "Miss Gonzalez, my office." She walked in, notebook ready, expecting another sterile directive. Instead, she found him staring at a sheet of paper on his desk with an expression of pure distaste, as if it were a dead fish. "I have a speech to give," he said, not looking at her. "Next Saturday, the annual Chandler Family Foundation Charity Gala." The name hit her. Family Foundation. This was connected to his father. "The PR department wrote this," he said, sliding the paper across the desk to her. "It's unacceptable." Kimberly picked it up and read the first line aloud. "In this fiscal year, the Chandler Family Foundation has successfully optimized its philanthropic impact by 15.7%, achieving a synergistic alignment of our core charitable directives with emerging market needs." She stopped, her face contorting in pain. "Wow. It sounds like you're describing a corporate takeover of Christmas." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was the first one she'd seen in a week. "Precisely. The speech is an hour long. By the end, half the audience will have died of boredom." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of the man from before the phone call. "Fix it. Make it sound like it was written by a person." "A person, not a stylish brick." "Got it," she said, a playful challenge in her voice. "You will, of course, be required to attend the gala with me," he added, his tone suddenly formal again, "to provide real-time support should any adjustments be needed." Kimberly froze. A charity gala, with billionaires and forks, so many forks. "Attend? With you?" "It's part of your job description, Miss Gonzalez. You're my director of authentic voice. Your presence is non-negotiable." She thought about her closet. A sad collection of thrift store blouses and one very tired blazer. She thought about her bank account, which, despite her new salary, hadn't seen its first paycheck yet. She couldn't afford a dress for a PTA meeting, let alone a billionaire's ball. I don't think I'll be able to make it," she stammered, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "I have a thing, a very important, uncancelable thing." He stared at her, his expression unreadable. "A thing?" "Yes, my cat. It has a scheduling conflict." Vincent didn't even blink. He just stared at her for a long, silent moment. She was sure he could see right through her pathetic lie. "See that your cat reschedules," he said, his voice flat. "You will be there." The conversation was over. Kimberly walked back to her office, her mind in a panic. She couldn't go, but she couldn't refuse. She was trapped. She spent the next 2 days trying to write his speech, but all she could think about was the impending social doom. She looked up dresses online, the prices mocking her. She could either buy a dress for the gala or pay rent for the next 3 months. On Thursday afternoon, a large, elegant box was delivered to her desk. It was from a designer boutique, so exclusive Kimberly didn't even know it existed. There was no card, just her name on the label. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue paper, was a dress. It was stunning, a deep sapphire blue, with a cut so simple and elegant it was timeless. It wasn't flashy or revealing. It was quietly, confidently beautiful. It was a dress that said, "I belong here." Tucked into the folds of the dress was a small, thick card. She opened it. "Miss Gonzalez," the note read, in Vincent's sharp, decisive handwriting. "The director of authentic voice is a reflection of this office. Consider this part of your uniform. The gala is a work event. You are expected to be appropriately attired." Kimberly sank into her chair, the soft fabric of the dress cool against her fingers. It was another small, big gesture, executed with military precision. He hadn't offered money. He hadn't put her in the awkward position of accepting a personal gift. He had framed it as a corporate requirement, a uniform completely preserving her pride while solving her problem. He had seen her lie, understood the reason behind it, and fixed it without ever acknowledging it. The stylish brick was a lot more observant than she gave him credit for. The night of the gala, Kimberly felt like an imposter. The dress fit perfectly, but she was sure everyone could see the thrift store girl underneath. The ballroom was breathtaking, a sea of diamonds, champagne, and people who looked like they were born in a tuxedo. Nervous? She turned to see Vincent standing beside her. He looked impossibly handsome, his tuxedo tailored to perfection. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes, when they met hers, held a question. "I feel like I'm going to be exposed as a fraud at any moment," she whispered, her voice shaky. "Someone's going to ask me about my summer home in the Hamptons, and I'm going to have to confess it's a tent I once pitched in my cousin's backyard." A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Just stick to what you know. Honesty." "My honesty is what got me into this mess," she reminded him. "And it's also what got you this job," he countered. Before she could reply, a woman who looked like a walking jewelry display glided over to them. "Vincent, darling, I haven't seen you since St. Bart's." She air-kissed him before turning a critical eye on Kimberly. "And who is this?" "This is Kimberly Gonzalez," Vincent said, his voice smooth as silk. "My director of authentic voice." The woman's eyebrows shot up. "How innovative. And what does a director of authentic voice do, exactly?" "I'm his professional sarcasmometer," Kimberly said before she could stop herself. The woman stared at her, blinked, and then let out a surprised laugh. Vincent just looked at her, a silent warning and a hint of a smile in his eyes. The evening was a blur of polite conversation and tiny, unidentifiable appetizers. Kimberly managed to navigate it all by staying close to Vincent and mostly just smiling. But as the time for his speech approached, she noticed a change in him. He grew quiet, his posture becoming more rigid. The easy confidence he projected was replaced by a subtle, coiled tension. "And now," the host announced from the stage, "it is my great honor to introduce the chairman of the Chandler Family Foundation, my dear friend, Vincent Chandler." The ballroom erupted in polite applause. Vincent gave her a nod, his face a perfect, emotionless mask, and walked to the stage. Kimberly's heart pounded in her chest. She had completely rewritten his speech. It was no longer a dry financial report. It was a story about the first family the foundation had ever helped, a story about hope and second chances. It was simple, human, and authentic. Vincent stood at the podium, the bright lights shining down on him. He looked out at the audience, at the sea of powerful, expectant faces. He adjusted the microphone, opened the folder with his speech, and froze. It was almost imperceptible at first, a slight hesitation, but then it became a complete stillness. He just stood there, staring at the pages, his jaw tight, his knuckles white as he gripped the sides of the podium. The applause had died down, and a confused, awkward silence began to fill the room. Kimberly watched in horror. He was panicking. The all-powerful CEO, the man who controlled a $10 billion empire, was completely frozen in front of a crowd. She could see the silent terror in his eyes. It was the pressure. The weight of his father's legacy of the Chandler name was crushing him. The silence stretched for an agonizing 10 seconds, then 20. People started to murmur, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Arthur, his assistant, looked like he was about to faint. Kimberly knew she had to do something. Her mind raced. She couldn't run up on stage. She couldn't shout. Then she remembered the story, the core of the speech. She grabbed a linen napkin from the table and the expensive pen from her purse. In large, clear letters, she scribbled a few words. She caught the eye of a passing waiter, a young man who looked as terrified as everyone else. "Please," she whispered, her voice urgent, "take this to him. Now. It's an emergency." The waiter, seeing the look on her face, didn't hesitate. He wove through the tables and walked up to the side of the stage, discreetly handing the folded napkin to Vincent. Vincent didn't look at him. His eyes were still glued to the useless speech in front of him. But he took the napkin. He unfolded it under the podium, hidden from the audience. Kimberly held her breath. The napkin had only 5 words on it. Forget the speech. Tell their story. Vincent read the words. His shoulders, which had been tense and high, lowered slightly. He took a slow, deep breath. He looked up from the podium, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found hers. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. A silent message. "You can do this." He looked back at the audience. And then he did something no one expected. He closed the folder containing the speech. "Good evening," he began, his voice still a little shaky but clear. "Tonight, I'm not going to talk about numbers. I'm not going to talk about synergistic directives." He looked down at the closed folder on the podium. "Instead, I want to tell you a story. A story about a man named John. A single father with 2 kids who lost his job and was about to lose his home." A hush fell over the room. Vincent started talking, and it wasn't the CEO speaking anymore. It was a man telling a story. He spoke about John's despair, about his daughter's worn-out shoes, about the letter he wrote to the foundation, not asking for a handout, but for a chance. His voice was quiet, raw, and completely authentic. For the next 10 minutes, he held the entire room captive. He didn't use a single corporate buzzword. He just told the truth. "The Chandler Foundation didn't give John money," Vincent concluded, his voice ringing with a new, powerful conviction. "We gave him a second chance, and that is a far better return on investment than any number on a spreadsheet." He finished, and for a moment there was absolute silence. Then one person started to clap, and then another, and then the entire ballroom erupted in a thunderous, heartfelt, standing ovation. It was the kind of applause he had never received in his life. It wasn't polite. It was real. As the applause washed over him, Vincent's eyes searched the crowd and found hers again. He was still on stage, she was still at her table. But in that moment, they were the only 2 people in the room. He gave her a look so full of raw, undisguised gratitude that it made her heart stop. He hadn't just given a speech. He had found his voice, and she was the one who had handed it to him. The morning after the gala felt like the first day of a new world. The air in the office was electric. As Kimberly walked to her desk, she was no longer the invisible intern. She was a minor legend. People smiled at her. Real smiles, not the polite, empty ones from before. Someone had left a blue napkin on her keyboard with the words, "Nice shot, Gonzalez," scribbled on it. She walked into her office, her heart a little lighter, and found Vincent already there, standing by the window, a cup of coffee in his hand. "Good morning, Miss Gonzalez," he said, his voice back to its usual calm, but the ice was gone. "Good morning, sir," she replied, a hint of a smile in her own voice. "I hope your speech was well received." He turned, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. It was authentic, thanks to my director of authentic voice. He took a sip of his coffee. "You saved me up there." "You saved yourself," she said quietly. "I just reminded you that you had a better story to tell." They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, the unspoken gratitude a palpable thing between them. It was more than a boss and an employee. They were partners, co-conspirators. "I have another project for you," he said finally, breaking the silence. "But it's not in the office." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh? Does it involve another near-death experience on a public stage?" "Something a little quieter," he said. "Come with me." He led her out of the building, not to one of his sleek black town cars, but to a vintage, dark green Jaguar parked in his private garage. He opened the passenger door for her, another small gesture that felt significant. "Where are we going?" she asked as he slid into the driver's seat. The car's interior smelled of old leather and something else, something real. "To see a ghost," he said, a mysterious glint in his eye. He drove them out of the city's frantic heart, toward a quieter, older neighborhood, the kind with cobblestone streets and ivy-covered brownstones. He parked in front of a small, unassuming building that looked like a forgotten library. "What is this place?" she asked. "The West Village Community Arts Center," he said, turning off the engine. "My first and only real project." They got out and he led her to the entrance. "I designed this in my final year of college," he explained, his voice a low murmur. Before you became a stylish brick," she finished for him, her voice gentle. He gave a small, sad smile. "Before I joined the family business." He pushed open the heavy wooden doors, and they stepped inside. The interior was stunning, not in a grand, opulent way, but in a quiet, thoughtful one. The space was filled with natural light pouring in from a massive skylight. Exposed wooden beams arched across the ceiling, and the walls were lined with bookshelves that curved and flowed like waves. In the center of the room, a group of children sat on colorful cushions, listening as a woman read a story aloud. "You designed this?" Kimberly whispered, her voice full of awe. It was a space built for people, for community, for stories. It was warm, inviting, and full of soul. It was everything Vincent Chandler's public persona was not. "It was my thesis project," he said, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of pride and a profound old sadness. "I wanted to be an architect. My passion was creating spaces that made people feel something, connection, peace." He walked over to a wall and ran his hand over the rough, exposed brick. "My father called it a sentimental hobby. He said Chandlers build empires, not community centers. He told me to put my toys away and learn the family business." Kimberly's heart ached for him. She was seeing it now, the ghost of the man he could have been, the man his father had buried under layers of corporate steel and synergistic assets. "He was wrong," she said softly. "This place it's alive. It's beautiful, Vincent." It was the first time she had used his first name. He turned to look at her, surprised, but not displeased. The sound of it on her lips felt right. "It was the last time I ever designed anything," he said, his gaze distant. "I put the drawings away. I went to business school. I learned how to build an empire." "But you never forgot this," she said, gesturing to the room. It was a statement, not a question. "No," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "I never forgot." They stood there in the quiet of the art center, the sound of children's laughter in the background. She had shared her soul with him on a page of her diary. Now he was sharing his with her in the bones of a building. The foundation between them, once built on a bizarre employment contract, was being replaced by something far more solid: shared dreams and shared wounds. "Thank you for showing me this," she said, her voice full of an emotion she couldn't name. "Thank you for being someone I could show it to," he replied. The mood when they returned to the office was electric with this new, fragile intimacy. They didn't speak of it, but the space between them was different. They were no longer just a boss and his ghostwriter. They were two people who had seen a glimpse of each other's hidden souls. Kimberly was at her desk, trying to process the revelation of Vincent the architect, when Arthur appeared at her door. His face, usually a pale mask of anxiety, was as white as a sheet. "Miss Gonzalez," he stammered. He's here." "He who?" she asked, her heart suddenly sinking. "Mr. Chandler," Arthur whispered, as if saying the name too loudly could summon a demon. "Senior." Just then the door to Vincent's office opened, and a man stepped out. He was older than Vincent, in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes as cold and gray as a winter storm. He was impeccably dressed, his posture ramrod straight, radiating an aura of absolute, uncompromising authority. This was the man who had crushed his son's dream. This was the source of the chill. "Vincent," the man's voice was a low, powerful growl. "I was just informing your staff that I'll be using your conference room." Vincent appeared behind him, his own posture instantly more rigid, his face a neutral mask. "Father, I wasn't aware you were coming in today." "I don't need an appointment in a building that bears my name," Alastair Chandler replied, his gaze sweeping the office before landing on Kimberly. He looked at her not as a person, but as a piece of furniture, an insignificant object in his son's orbit. "And who is this?" "This is Kimberly Gonzalez, my director of authentic voice," Vincent said, his tone perfectly level, but Kimberly could feel the tension radiating from him. Alastair's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. "Authentic voice? Is that what we're calling public relations these days?" He looked back at Vincent. "I heard your speech at the gala. Sentimental drivel. Chandlers are leaders, Vincent, not storytellers. You sounded weak." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart. Vincent's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. "I trust you'll be joining my meeting," Alastair continued. "We're discussing the Henderson deal. Your creative speech seems to have made them nervous. They need reassurance from an adult." He turned to walk away, dismissing Kimberly with a final, uninterested glance. "Actually, Father," Vincent's voice cut through the air, stopping him in his tracks. "Miss Gonzalez will be joining us as well." Alastair turned slowly, one silver eyebrow raised in a silent, disdainful question. "Her insights were instrumental in the strategy for that speech," Vincent continued, his voice calm but firm. "Her perspective is valuable. She will be in the meeting." Kimberly held her breath. He was defending her. He was standing up to the source of the storm, right in front of her. Alistair stared at his son for a long, cold moment, his gray eyes assessing, calculating. He looked at Kimberly again, this time with a flicker of something new. Annoyance. He had dismissed her as irrelevant, but his son had just declared her a key player. She was no longer furniture. She was an obstacle. "As you wish," Alistair said finally, his voice dripping with condescension. "Just ensure your director of voice remembers her place is to take notes, not to have opinions." He turned and strode into the conference room without another word. The moment he was gone, the temperature in the office seemed to rise by 10 degrees. Vincent let out a slow breath he seemed to have been holding. He looked at Kimberly, a silent apology in his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked. She was shaken, but she was also filled with a fierce, protective admiration. She met his gaze and gave him a small, determined smile. "I am," she said. "The question is, are you?" He didn't answer. He just gave her a look of profound, weary gratitude, and together they walked into the lion's den. The meeting with Alistair was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Kimberly sat silently, taking notes, but her mind wasn't just recording the business jargon. She was watching a predator at work. Alistair never raised his voice. He didn't have to. His power was in the subtle dismissal, the way he would listen to Vincent's well-reasoned points, and then turn to another board member with a question that completely undermined his son's authority. He treated Vincent not like a CEO, but like a disappointing student, and he treated Kimberly like she was invisible. He never once made eye contact with her, never acknowledged her presence. It was a deliberate, calculated move to signal her irrelevance. The meeting ended 2 hours later. The Henderson deal was secure, but it was a hollow victory. Vincent had been professionally neutered in front of his own team. As the other board members filed out, Vincent remained at the head of the table, staring at the polished surface, his jaw tight. Kimberly waited, giving him a moment. "So," she said quietly after the door closed. "That was intense." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "That was my father on a good day." He finally looked at her, his eyes weary. "Welcome to the family business, Miss Gonzalez." "He uses your ambition against you," she said, sitting down in the chair next to him. Vincent looked at her, surprised. "What?" "Everything you propose, he frames it as youthful recklessness," she explained, looking at her notes. "He positions himself as the voice of wisdom and stability, so any disagreement with him makes you look impulsive. He doesn't argue with your facts, he attacks your character." Vincent stared at her. She had just perfectly articulated the dynamic he had been trapped in his entire life, a dynamic he had never been able to put into words. She wasn't just a writer, she was a reader of people. "How did you see that?" he asked, his voice a low murmur. "It's my job, remember," she said with a small smile. "To translate. I just translated the subtext of the meeting." He shook his head, a look of grudging admiration on his face. "My father has been doing that to me for 30 years, and you figured it out in 2 hours. Maybe you were too close to see it," she said gently. "It's hard to read the label when you're inside the bottle." In that moment, the last of the professional distance between them dissolved. He wasn't her boss, and she wasn't his employee. They were allies, sitting together in the aftermath of a battle, trying to figure out how to win the war. The war began the next morning. Vincent walked into his office to find Arthur, his assistant, looking even more panicked than usual. "Sir," Arthur stammered, "there's a problem with the new Community Outreach Initiative." The Community Outreach Initiative was Kimberly's first major project as Director of Authentic Voice. It was a partnership with local schools to fund creative writing programs. It was a small, inexpensive project, but it was her baby. "What kind of problem?" Vincent asked, his stomach tightening. "Funding," Arthur said, wringing his hands. "The board's finance committee held an emergency review this morning. They've frozen the budget. They're citing non-essential spending during a period of market volatility." Vincent felt a cold rage wash over him. It was his father. It was a direct, targeted attack, not at him, but at her. The budget for the program was pocket change for a company like Chandler Corp. This wasn't about money. It was about power. It was Alistair showing Vincent that anything he valued, anything connected to Kimberly, could be taken away. "Get Miss Gonzalez in here," Vincent said, his voice dangerously quiet. When Kimberly walked in, he could see she already knew. The news had clearly spread like wildfire. She was holding a printout of the committee's decision, her face pale, but her eyes were defiant. "It's him, isn't it?" she said. "Yes," he replied. "This is how he operates. He doesn't attack me directly. He attacks what I care about." "So what do we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the obvious hurt. "Do I just let it go?" Vincent looked at her, at the quiet strength that had so fascinated him from the very beginning. He had two choices. He could play his father's game, fight a political battle in the boardroom, a battle that would be long and ugly. Or he could do something else. "We work," he said. "We work late. We prepare a new proposal. We don't just ask for the funding back. We create a plan so brilliant, so undeniable, that they'll look like fools forever questioning it." And so they did. That night, long after the rest of the building had emptied, the lights on the 87th floor were still on. They turned Vincent's office into a war room. Pizza boxes, from a place far fancier than Kimberly could have afforded a month ago, piled up in the corner. They worked side by side at his massive desk, the city lights twinkling below them. She brought the heart. He brought the numbers. She wrote a narrative about the power of storytelling and community. He built a financial model that proved the program would generate more positive press and brand loyalty than any ad campaign, at a fraction of the cost. They argued, they laughed, they challenged each other. She told him his projections were as dry as a calculus textbook. He told her that her mission statement was beautiful, but sounded like it was written by a well-meaning golden retriever. It was the most productive, most invigorating, and most intimate work either of them had ever done. Around 2 a.m., they finally had it. A 20-page proposal that was a work of art, a perfect fusion of his ruthless business acumen and her profound humanity. It's good," Kimberly said, her voice hoarse with exhaustion as she read the final draft. "It's undeniable," he said, a tired but triumphant smile on his face. He looked at her, at the smudge of ink on her cheek, at the way her hair had fallen out of its professional bun. He had never seen her look more beautiful. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low murmur. For not backing down." "We're a good team, you and I," she said, a soft smile on her own face. The air in the room was thick with unspoken emotions, the adrenaline of their shared victory giving way to something quieter, more personal. "We are," he said, his gaze dropping to her lips. The moment stretched, electric and fragile. He was about to lean in, she was about to meet him, when the shrill ring of the cleaning crew's vacuum cleaner started up in the hallway outside, shattering the spell. They both jumped back, the moment broken. "Right," she said, clearing her throat and gathering her things. I should go. It's late." "Yes," he said, his own voice a little rough. "It's late." He walked her to the elevator in a silence that was more charged than any conversation. As the doors slid open, he spoke. "Kimberly, yes, you're not just a writer, you're a fighter. Don't ever forget that." She smiled, a real, tired, beautiful smile. "I won't. Good night, Vincent." "Good night, Kimberly." As the elevator doors closed, Vincent stood alone in the hallway, the smell of pizza and the ghost of a shared victory lingering in the air. He had won the battle for the proposal, but he was starting to realize there was a much bigger, much more important battle he needed to win. The next day, Vincent presented the new proposal to the board. It was, as he had predicted, undeniable. Faced with a plan that was both financially sound and morally compelling, the Finance Committee had no choice but to reinstate the funding. It was a quiet victory, but a significant one. He and Kimberly had faced Alistair's attack together, and they had won. When the news reached Kimberly, she felt a surge of triumph, but it was tempered by a growing unease. She had seen how Alistair operated. This wouldn't be the end. He would come at them again. Harder. Her fears were confirmed that evening. She was leaving the office when she saw Alistair waiting for her by the elevators. He was alone. "Miss Gonzalez," he said, his voice a low, polite growl. "A word, if you please." Kimberly's heart pounded, but she kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Chandler?" "I find myself intrigued," he said, his cold eyes scanning her from head to toe. "My son has never shown such passionate defense for a corporate initiative or for an employee." "It's a good program," she said simply. "Is it?" Alistair took a step closer. "Or is it that you have a certain influence over him? an influence that is making him sentimental. Weak. I think your son is stronger than you give him credit for, she replied, her voice steady. Alistair's lips curved into that same cold smile. Strength, my dear, is about making hard choices, not sentimental ones. Vincent is forgetting that. He is forgetting his duty to this family, to his name. He looked at her, and his next words were a clear, undisguised threat. I would advise you to be very careful, Miss Gonzalez. Influences that are deemed unhealthy have a way of being removed. He didn't wait for a reply. He simply turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the empty hallway, a chill running down her spine. It was no longer just a corporate battle. Alistair had made it personal. He saw her as a disease, and he was planning to cut her out. She was so shaken that she didn't hear Vincent come up behind her. What did he say to you? He asked, his voice tight with a protective anger. She turned, trying to force a smile. Just the usual Chandler charm. He's worried you're becoming too sentimental. Vincent's jaw clenched. Don't listen to him, Kimberly. I'm trying not to, she said, but her voice trembled slightly. He saw the fear in her eyes, the fear she was trying so hard to hide. And in that moment, he made a decision. Come on, he said, taking her by the arm. We're getting out of here. Out of where? It's 7 p.m. Out of this building, out of this city, just for a few hours. He led her to the elevator, his grip firm and reassuring. My father thinks he can win by suffocating us with this world. He looked at her, his eyes full of a fierce determination. Tonight, we're going to breathe. He didn't take her to a fancy restaurant or a black tie event. He drove the old Jaguar out of the city, toward the coast. An hour later, they were standing on a deserted, windswept beach, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore a wild, liberating roar. The city was a distant glow on the horizon. They walked along the water's edge in silence for a long time, the cold sea air a welcome shock to the system. This is my secret weapon, he said finally, his voice almost lost in the sound of the ocean. When the pressure gets to be too much, I come here, to remember that the world is bigger than a boardroom. It's beautiful, she said, her voice a whisper. He wants to break you, Vincent said, stopping and turning to face her. He sees you as the reason I'm changing, and he's right. Vincent? No, let me finish, he said, taking her hands. His were warm against her cold ones. You walked into my life and held up a mirror. You showed me a man I didn't want to be. A man who was cold and lonely and empty. He looked into her eyes, and all the walls, all the masks were gone. I'm falling in love with you, Kimberly. The words hung in the air, mixing with the salt spray and the sound of the waves. She had known it, had felt it, but hearing him say it so simply and so honestly made her heart ache with a terrifying, wonderful joy. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered, and the words were as natural and as unstoppable as the tide. He pulled her into his arms, and his kiss was nothing like their almost kiss in the elevator. It was real and deep, and tasted of salt and wind and a promise of a storm they would face together. As they stood on that deserted beach, wrapped in each other's arms, they both knew that Alistair Chandler had made a fatal mistake. He had tried to tear them apart. Instead, he had just given them a reason to fight, and together they were a force he had never anticipated. The drive back from the beach was a world away from their first trip in the vintage Jaguar. The silence was no longer tense or exploratory. It was a comfortable, easy quiet, punctuated by shared smiles. Back in the city, Vincent didn't drop Kimberly off at her apartment. He took her to his, the vast, silent penthouse that had once felt so intimidating. For the first time, it didn't feel like his territory. It felt like a place they could make their own. They spent the weekend in a bubble of newfound happiness. He cooked for her, a surprisingly decent omelet, and she teased him mercilessly for owning a kitchen that looked like a science lab but was clearly never used. They talked for hours, not about work, but about everything else. Her chaotic family in Ohio, his lonely childhood in boarding schools, their shared love for old movies. He learned that her sarcasm was a shield, forged in a family where you had to be loud to be heard. She learned that his silence was also a shield, built to protect a core of vulnerability he rarely let anyone see. They were two lonely people who had finally found their language. On Monday morning, they walked into the office together. They didn't hold hands, didn't make a scene, but the shift was palpable. The way he looked at her when she spoke in a meeting, the way she smiled when he made a dry, witty comment only she would understand. The entire 87th floor could feel it. The stylish brick was melting, and the sarcastic intern was the one holding the blowtorch. Their partnership had become a powerful force. With Kimberly translating his vision into human terms, Vincent began to implement changes at Chandler Corp. They launched the now fully funded community writing program. They overhauled the company's internal communications, replacing sterile corporate memos with clear, honest updates. For the first time, employees felt like they were working for a person, not a faceless entity. Vincent had never felt more alive, more purposeful. Kimberly, in turn, had never felt more seen, more valued. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. Her novel, which she worked on late at night, was flowing effortlessly. Her life, which had been a frantic budget calculation, was now full of a quiet, stable joy. They were building something real, both at the company and in their hearts. They were so wrapped up in their perfect new world that they forgot one crucial detail. Alistair Chandler never lost. The attack came on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't a corporate maneuver. It was a character assassination. Kimberly's phone began to buzz with notifications. Then Vincent's. Arthur appeared at the door of his office, his face ashen, holding a tablet as if it were radioactive. "Sir," he whispered, you need to see this." On the screen was an article from a notoriously vicious financial tabloid. The headline was brutal. The Chandler Scandal. CEO seduced by manipulative intern? Inside the calculated plot to infiltrate an empire. The article was a masterpiece of cruelty and distortion. It painted Kimberly as a cunning, ambitious gold digger who had targeted Vincent from day one. And then came the killing blow. It quoted her diary. "He's handsome, I guess, in that I own a small country sort of way. He has the emotional range of a very stylish, very expensive brick." The words, once funny and private, were now twisted into evidence of her contempt and her manipulative plan. The article even included a distorted version of her financial woes, framing her poverty not as a struggle, but as a motive. Sources close to the company, the article claimed, say Gonzalez had a history of financial desperation and saw Chandler as her lottery ticket. Kimberly felt the blood drain from her face. She felt dizzy, sick. Her most private, vulnerable thoughts, the words that had bizarrely brought her and Vincent together, were now being used as a public weapon to destroy her. "How?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "How did they get it?" Vincent stared at the screen, his face a mask of stone, but his eyes were blazing with a cold, terrifying fury. "My father," he said, his voice a low growl. "He must have had someone access your initial email. He's been holding on to this, waiting for the right moment to use it." The phone began to ring. It was the head of PR, then the head of legal. The scandal was exploding. The company's stock was already starting to dip in pre-market trading. "They're painting me as a villain," Kimberly said, her voice breaking. "They're using my own words to make me look like I planned all of this." Vincent walked over to her, his rage a palpable force in the room. He didn't say, "It's going to be okay." He didn't offer empty platitudes. He did something much more powerful. He gently took her chin, making her look at him. "This is not your fault," he said, his voice fierce and protective. "This is a declaration of war, and my father has severely underestimated his opponent." Before they could plan their next move, Arthur appeared at the door again, his face even paler, if that was possible. "Sir, your father has called an emergency board meeting. In 1 hour." The boardroom felt like an execution chamber. Alistair Chandler sat at the head of the table, not in Vincent's chair, but in the one at the opposite end, positioning himself as the patriarch, the judge. The other board members, old, powerful men who had served his father for decades, sat with grim expressions. "Vincent," Alistair began, his voice laced with a false, paternal disappointment. "This is a disaster. The company's reputation is in tatters. Our stock is down 9%. The sentimental culture you've been fostering has finally blown up in your face." "This has nothing to do with culture," Vincent retorted, his voice cold as ice. "This is a personal attack, orchestrated by you." Alistair didn't even flinch. "I am doing what is necessary to protect this family's legacy, something you seem to have forgotten." He looked around the table at the other board members. "The board has discussed the matter," We see only one path forward to contain this damage. He then looked directly at Vincent and delivered the ultimatum. You will terminate Ms. Gonzalez's employment, effective immediately. You will issue a public statement denouncing her as a manipulative opportunist who misled you and the company. You will state that you were a victim of her scheme. It is the only narrative that saves your reputation and, more importantly, the company's. The room was silent. Kimberly, who had insisted on being there, stood silently against the back wall, feeling the weight of 20 pairs of judging eyes on her. No, Vincent said, the word quiet but absolute. Alistair raised an eyebrow. I beg your pardon? I said no, Vincent repeated, standing up. He looked around the table at the men who had watched him grow up. I will not fire her, and I will certainly not slander an innocent woman to save my own skin. Vincent, be reasonable, a board member pleaded. This is about damage control, not emotion. This is about integrity, Vincent shot back. Something this board seems to have forgotten. Alistair smiled, a cold, predatory smile. He had been expecting this. Your loyalty is touching, if misguided. But you must understand the stakes, son. If you refuse to take the necessary steps to protect this company, then the board will be forced to conclude that you are no longer fit to lead it. The threat was clear. It was the final move in his father's brutal chess game. Kimberly or the Empire. He couldn't have both. We will hold a vote of no confidence, Alistair continued, his voice smooth as venom. And we will remove you as CEO. The choice is yours, Vincent. A woman you've known for a few months, or the legacy our family has built for a century. The boardroom was silent, the air thick with the weight of that impossible choice. Kimberly watched Vincent, her heart breaking for him. She saw the pain, the conflict in his eyes. He had worked his entire life for this company, had sacrificed his own dreams for it. She couldn't let him lose it because of her. She was about to speak, to resign, to fall on her own sword to save him, when he turned and looked at her. He saw the intention in her eyes, and he gave her a look so full of fierce, unwavering love and a silent command to stay quiet that it stole the breath from her lungs. He turned back to the board, a new, cold calm settling over him. You are correct, Father. I have a choice to make. He looked at each and every member of the board, and I have made it. He walked over to where Kimberly was standing and took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers, a public, defiant act of unity. Gentlemen, Vincent said, his voice ringing with a power that had nothing to do with his title. Thank you for your time. My father is right. This company needs a leader who is willing to do whatever it takes to protect its most valuable assets. He squeezed Kimberly's hand. And you are looking at him. But my definition of a valuable asset has changed. He looked at his father. You want a war, Father? You will have one. But we will not be fighting it in the shadows, with lies and leaks. We will fight it in the light. He then looked at the rest of the board. The annual shareholders' meeting is in 1 week. I will address this scandal then, in person, in front of our investors and the press. He gave a cold, dangerous smile. And I suggest you all be there. It's going to be a hell of a show. Without another word, he led Kimberly out of the boardroom, leaving behind a group of stunned, silent men and a furious, momentarily outmaneuvered patriarch. Back in his office, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving them in a quiet, tense silence. You just risked everything, Kimberly whispered, her voice full of awe and terror. No, he said, turning to her and cupping her face in his hands. I just chose everything. He looked into her eyes, his own full of a fierce, unwavering certainty. He thinks he can destroy you with a story. He has no idea that he just gave the best writer I know the ending she was looking for. What do we do now? She asked, her voice still shaking. Vincent smiled, a slow, predatory grin that was all Chandler, but with a new fire behind it. Now, he said, you and I are going to write a speech. And it's not going to be a defense. It's going to be a goddamn manifesto. The week leading up to the shareholders' meeting was the most intense of their lives. Vincent's office became their sanctuary and their battlefield. They barely slept, fueled by coffee and a shared, defiant energy. They weren't just writing a speech, they were crafting a new future, not only for themselves, but for the entire company. Kimberly was the architect of the narrative, weaving a story of transformation. Vincent was the engineer, ensuring every claim was backed by hard data, proving that a company with a soul could be more profitable than one without. The night before the meeting, they stood together by the massive window in his office, looking out at the city. The final draft of the speech was on the desk. It was bold, personal, and dangerous. "Are you sure about this?" Kimberly asked, her voice a quiet murmur. "You're not just risking your job. You're taking on your father, your entire family history." He turned to her, his expression serious, but his eyes were calm. "My father's legacy is a fortress," he said. "It's strong, it's powerful, but it's cold and empty. You taught me how to build a home." He gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I'm not risking anything, Kimberly. For the first time, I'm choosing what's truly valuable." The auditorium was packed. Hundreds of shareholders, board members, and financial journalists filled the seats, the air thick with tension and anticipation. The scandal had been the talk of Wall Street for a week. Everyone was here to see the public execution of Vincent Chandler. Alistair sat in the front row, a smug, confident look on his face. He had won. His son had been backed into a corner and would have no choice but to capitulate. Kimberly sat in a reserved seat in the second row, her heart pounding. Vincent squeezed her hand once before he walked onto the stage, a silent promise. He stood at the podium, the bright lights shining down, just like at the gala. But this time, there was no hesitation, no fear. He looked out at the crowd, his gaze calm and unwavering, and set aside his prepared notes. "Good morning," he began, his voice clear and strong, echoing through the silent room. "I know why you're all here. You've read the headlines, you've heard the rumors, and you're here to see how I'm going to handle the Kimberly Gonzalez problem." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Well, I'm here to tell you that Kimberly Gonzalez is not the problem. She is the solution." A shocked murmur rippled through the audience. Alistair's smile faltered. "For years," Vincent continued, "I have led this company with a singular focus on the bottom line. I was taught that emotion is a liability, that sentiment is weakness, that people are assets to be managed. I was, as one brutally honest observer noted, a stylish, expensive brick." A few chuckles broke the tension in the room. "And then, an intern accidentally sent me a page from her diary, an email that should have gotten her fired. Instead, it saved my life." He looked directly at Kimberly, his voice full of an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "In that one page there was more honesty, more passion, and more truth than I had encountered in 10 years in this business. It was a mirror, and for the first time, I didn't like the man I saw." He turned his attention back to the crowd, his voice ringing with conviction. "The tabloids want you to believe this is a story of manipulation. They are wrong. This is a story of transformation. Kimberly Gonzalez didn't infiltrate this company. She humanized it. She taught me that our greatest synergistic asset is not our market share, it's our soul." He then looked directly at his father. "My father believes in a legacy of power, of control, of a name built on ruthless efficiency. He believes I have a duty to that legacy." Vincent's voice dropped, but it was filled with a new, quiet power. "And he is right. I do have a duty, but not to a name. My duty is to the people who work for this company and to the communities we serve." This was it, the moment of sacrifice. "Therefore, effective immediately, I am announcing the formation of a new division within Chandler Corp. It will be called the Authentic Voice Initiative, and its mission will be to invest in projects that prioritize human connection and community impact. It will be led by the most qualified person I know, Kimberly Gonzalez." The room erupted. It was an act of open rebellion. He wasn't just refusing to fire her, he was promoting her, empowering her in front of the entire world. "As for the Chandler legacy," Vincent continued, his voice resonating with finality, "a legacy built on fear and control is not one I wish to lead. If being a Chandler means sacrificing integrity for profit, then I no longer wish to be a Chandler." He looked at Alistair, his eyes no longer holding fear, but a calm, liberating pity. "You can have the name, Father. I'm more interested in building a future." For a moment there was stunned silence. Alistair sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He had lost control. His son had just publicly disowned him and everything he stood for. Then a single shareholder in the back stood up and started to clap. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium, minus the board members his father controlled, was on its feet, a thunderous wave of applause washing over the stage. They weren't just clapping for a CEO. They were clapping for a man. Vincent stepped down from the stage, walked through the applauding crowd, and didn't stop until he reached Kimberly. He took her hand, and without a word, they walked out of the auditorium together, leaving the wreckage of the old Chandler empire behind them. They didn't go back to the office. He drove the vintage Jaguar, the roof down, the wind whipping through their hair, until they were back at the West Village Community Arts Center, the place he had shown her his ghost. They stood in the center of the room, the afternoon sun streaming through the skylight, the sound of children reading in the corner, a gentle murmur. "You didn't just give a speech," she said, her voice full of awe. "You started a revolution." "You started it," he said, turning to face her. "You were the first person who wasn't afraid to tell me the truth, and I want to spend the rest of my life listening to your truth." He took a small, worn, leather-bound book from his jacket pocket. It was her diary. "Arthur retrieved it from the tabloid," he explained. "I believe this belongs to you." She took it, her fingers tracing the familiar cover. "There's just one more entry I need you to write," he said, his voice a low, nervous murmur she had never heard before. He got down on one knee, right there on the floor of the building he had designed so long ago. He opened a small, velvet box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring that shone in the sunlight. "Kimberly Gonzalez," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the most brilliant, most infuriating, and most wonderful woman I have ever met. You are my authentic voice. Will you write the rest of our story with me? Will you marry me?" Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down her face. "Yes," she whispered, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, you stylish, expensive, wonderful brick. Of course, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. He stood and pulled her into his arms, and they kissed. A long, deep kiss that was the end of one story and the beginning of a much better one. The office of the director of the Authentic Voice Initiative, 2 years later, looked different. The sleek, minimalist furniture had been replaced by a comfortable, slightly cluttered collection of vintage chairs and bookshelves overflowing with books. On the wall, instead of abstract corporate art, were framed drawings by children from the community programs the initiative now funded across the country. Kimberly Chandler, a name she was still getting used to, sat at her desk, not looking at a financial report, but at the final proofs of her first novel. It was a story about a sarcastic, broke girl who accidentally falls in love with a billionaire. The critics were already calling it a masterpiece of romantic comedy. The door opened, and Vincent walked in. He was no longer wearing the severe, tailored suits of his past. He wore a soft, casual sweater, and his smile was easy and genuine. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her, kissing the top of her head. "How's the great American novelist?" he murmured in her ear. "She's thinking her main character is a little unbelievable," Kimberly teased, leaning back against him. "No man is this patient in real life." "He just had a very good teacher," Vincent said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He looked at the manuscript in her hands, then at the woman in his arms. He had thought that accidentally receiving with a page from her diary was the moment that had changed his life. He was wrong. Every moment with her was that moment. Every day, she rewrote his world, making it warmer, brighter, and infinitely more real. The stylish brick was long gone. In his place was just a man, deeply and completely in love. And that was a story better than any she could ever write. What did you think of the story of Vincent and Kimberly? On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate their journey from an accidental email to a happily ever after? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And for everyone who has stayed with us until the very end, who believes that the most authentic voice is the voice of the heart, please comment manifesto. We are so grateful to share these stories with you. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more narratives that will change the world.